Indire Tajam Govarega Shikumia Shusing Bo, you see him, you don't obey me, sir. The Ashura Kamakanamuri Pola Lucy Uria, no sense in them without Nani of Shumabi with an idea on Josiah, Lumia on Josiah, sir. Very chain about the without Tika Malushi Yoga, he poked out that day, sir. He poked out it Yoga, she needed Nega assign yoga, poked out a book with a Taraga, Pyoga about it. The louse of Lona Peel, who in a Genia Bipipai. I should let her out. The Ajamadi the Bogoria, take 2 Zani Melo. We do Ninia, take me 2 Zan Lavo. Lavimelo Idia Adhulu, Cha Yoga Shini Yoga Pioponi, whatever Celebido, Nalu, Down Sujara and Holodini, Cha Yoga di Pioponi, Taraka Lidi, Queen Cushion, Shimpia was in Tavare.
In conjunction with the 8th factor conducive to the sharpening of the controlling faculties, Sayadaw talked about how one should exercise the greatest degree of patience and perseverance, coupled with courageous effort when one encounters or confronts painful sensations arising in the course of one's practice. He also talked about how it is possible for yogis who are being very mindful of painful sensations with patience and courageous effort. How these yogis, how it's possible for such yogis to not only come to know the true nature of pain, but it is also possible for them to be cured of certain chronic ailments or diseases or some injury that has been sustained in early childhood. In fact, he talked about a particular case of a man who was suffering from some gastric troubles, who had a tumor in his stomach, and how he successfully cured himself through very courageous meditation. This may seem to be pretty interesting and perhaps even miraculous for people who are not familiar with the Dhamma. For Sayadaw, however, this is quite a common occurrence and is not anything very special. And therefore, he thought yesterday that the example that he gave, the case example that he related last night, would be quite sufficient to illustrate the point. But because he came to understand that there were some people who were desirous of listening to more case examples, he thought that he might be useful to relate a few cases tonight.
Yoga ပြပုံလေးအကုန်လုံးတင်ပြရမယ်ဆိုရင်တော့ဒီစကားပြီးဆုံးတဲ့အထိအဲ့ဒီဝတ္ထုကြောင့်လည်းပဲအဆုံးသတ်ရတော့မှာပဲအဲ့ဒါအဲ့ဒီတည်းကတစ်ခုကောင်းတစ်ခုကောင်းလောက်ပဲပြောဖို့ရည်ထားပါတယ်
If Sayadaw were to give you an extensive description of all the cases that he had come across through his experience as a teacher, as a meditation teacher, he will probably barely finish it by the end of this retreat. And therefore he will only pick out a few outstanding cases and relate them tonight.
အဲ့ဒီပျောက်သွားတဲ့ယောဂရှင်တွေကအဆုတ်ယောဂရှင်တကာကြီးတယောက်ပျောက်ပုံရှိဥစွာပြောပါမယ်
Sayadaw would like to talk about the case of a man who was suffering from tuberculosis.
အဲ့ဒီတကာကြီးဟာနှစ်ပေါင်းတော်တော်ကြာတဲ့ကူကအဲ့ဒီဆုတ်ယောဂဆွဲကပ်ပြီးတော့သူမြေဝကျွန်းပေါ်ဆေးရုံကြီးတွေမှာလည်းပဲတက်ရောက်ကုသခံပါတယ်မပြောက်ပါဘူးပြီးတော့ရန်ကုန်အဆုတ်ယောဂဆေးရုံကြီးလည်းတက်ရောက်ကုသခံပါတယ်မပြောက်ပါဘူးပြီးတော့တိုင်းရင်ကုသရေးနဲ့လည်းပဲကုသတော့မပြောက်ပါဘူးနောက်ဆုံးသူ့မှာတလမ်းပဲရှိပါတော့တယ်အဲ့ဒီတလမ်းကတော့အခြားမဟုတ်ပါဘူးသေဖို့တလမ်းပါပဲဒီတော့တလမ်းသွားဖြစ်နေပြီးအာဟုစရာတော့ရှာမပဲဆိုပြီးတော့ဒီနေ့မှာရန်ကုန်မဟာစီသာသနာ့ရေးတာကိုယောဂကင်းတဲ့အသွင်ဆောင်ပြီးတော့ဟန်ဆောင်ပြီးတော့ဗောလေသူကယောဂီဖြစ်ဝင်လာပါတယ်
Now this gentleman had been suffering from TB for many years. He had tried to seek treatment from various doctors, having even been admitted to various hospitals and even to the special TB department of the General Hospital in Rangoon. But it was all in vain. He was warded a couple of times in hospital, but still it did not quite help him to cure the disease completely. He resorted to also herbal medicine, to traditional medicine of the Burmese people. And that too didn't really give him much relief. Eventually he was very downhearted. He was very desperate and he thought that this was the end for him. There was no cure and the only path he had at the moment was the path of death. It was a very sorry situation. So in his desperation, he concealed the fact that he was a TB patient. Made himself look pretty healthy and applied to take up meditation at the Yekta in Rangoon.
အဲ့ဒါလိုရောက်လာပြီးတရားထုတ်လို့တရင်နှစ်ပတ်လောက်အနေမှာသူကယောဂကင်းတဲ့အနေနဲ့ရှို့ပြီးတော့တိတ်တိတ်ဝင်လာပြီမယ်လို့ဝေဒနာကရောက်တဲ့အခါကျတော့တရားဝေဒနာနဲ့သူမပြောက်နိုင်တဲ့တီဘီဝေဒနာနဲ့ပေါင်းစပ်ပြီးတော့ဗောလေဝေဒနာတွေတခါတည်းကိုအကြီးအကျယ်ပေါ်လာတာပဲဘယ်လောက်ဒီပေါ်လာလဲဆိုရင်ညပိုင်းမှာမအေးရလောက်အောင်ကိုပဲချောင်းဆိုးတယ်
တရင်နှစ်ပတ်
လောက်နေမှာ
So having came into the yekta, he started to meditate rather innocently. Although his true state of health was well concealed when he first arrived at the yekta, within 2 weeks of practice, the painful sensations that come very naturally with the Dhamma, as well as his chronic TB sensations, began to arise. At that time he had a lot of trouble. Coupled with his normal TB sufferings, he had to deal with Dhamma suffering. And it was so bad, so excruciating, so painful, so exhausting that he could not even sleep at night because he was coughing through the whole night.
အဲ့ဒါလို6စိုးတာနေဘုန်းကြီးကျောင်းလေးကနေပြီးတော့ညဘက်ကြားနေတော့ရိုးရိုးအောင်မေးလို့ဘုန်းကြီးက6စိုးစည်းလေးပါလေးပေးပျောက်စည်းလေးပေးမလို့ပေါ့လေဗမာလိုတော့ရက်စားတော့ပါတော့ပေါ့သွားတာတကားဖွင့်လိုက်တဲ့အခါကျတော့ဟိုမှာဘုန်းကြီးကစကားမပြောအားသေးဘူးမောနေတယ်ခါကြီးစည်းလေးပါလေးစားမလားပြီးတော့စကားမပြောအောင်နည်းနည်းသတိဆောင်ပြီးတော့ပေါ့လေစကားပြောတာတပည့်တော်ဖျားတဲ့တီပီယောဂရှင်ပါတဲ့ယောဂကင်းတဲ့အနေနဲ့ဝင်လာတာအခုတော့ယောဂကဖော်ထုတ်နေပြီတဲ့ယောဂရှင်ဖြစ်ကြောင်းဖော်ထုတ်နေပြီတော်တော်ဆိုးတဲ့ယောဂပါတဲ့သူရဲ့ရှေ့မှာလည်းပဲထွေးကံလေးထဲမှာသွေးတွေတော်တော်များများပေါ့လေပါနေတာတွေ့ပါတယ်အဲ့တော့မှဘုန်းကြီးကလည်းနည်းနည်းတော့တမျိုးတော့ဖြစ်သွားတာစိတ်ထဲဟာတီဗီပိုးတွေတော့ကိုယ်ထဲတော့ရောက်ကုန်ပြီလို့ဒါနဲ့စိတ်လည်းပဲတင်းပြီးတော့သူလည်းပဲနှစ်သိမ့်တာပေါ့လေသူကဘာပြောတယ်ဆိုတော့ဒီယောဂကကုသတတ်တဲ့ယောဂပါတဲ့ရှင်ဖျားတို့ဆက်လက်ခွင့်ပြုလို့ရှိရင်လည်းတပည့်တော်တရားထုတ်ရမှာပဲတဲ့ဆက်လက်မပြုလို့ရှိရင်လည်းပဲတပည့်တော်ပြန်ရမှာပါပဲတဲ့တပည့်တော်သီလတစ်ခုပဲရှိတာပါပဲတဲ့တဏှာသွားတယ်အဲတော့မှသူမကုသရအောင်ဆိုပြီးတော့တင့်တော်တဲ့နီးနဲ့ပေါ့လေပြုလို့ဆောင်ရွက်ပေးသူလည်းပဲဆက်လက်ပြီးတော့တရားထုတ်တဲ့အခါမှာတလကြော်ကြော်လေးလောက်မှာအဲ့ဒီဒီပေယောဂတခါအရှင်းပြောက်သွားတာ
One night, Sayadaw was in his cottage and he heard this terrible coughing coming from the quarters of this yogi, and thinking that it was just a coughing fit that he had certainly been infected with, Sayadaw brought some Burmese herbal medicine with him and went to the yogi's quarters. He was thinking that perhaps he might get some relief by taking some of the Burmese herbal medicines. Upon reaching his room, Sayadaw opened the door and there was the poor man. He was in the room, sprawled, speechless. He was so tired, he was totally exhausted. Couldn't even say anything to the Sayadaw. And in the spittoon could be seen a lot of blood that he had ejected through his coughing. Sayadaw asked, Yogi, wouldn't you like some medicine? Maybe it might help to relieve you of your condition. And he was gasping and panting for breath and quite unable to answer the Sayadaw immediately. Finally, when he had gained enough composure and gathered up some mindfulness, he confessed to the Sayadaw. He said, well, Sayadaw, I came here in the guise of of a perfectly healthy man, but actually I'm suffering from TB. I'm a TB patient. When Sayadaw heard that, one of the first thoughts that occurred in his mind was, gosh, this guy's got TB. I wonder whether I breathe in any of the germs. Then the poor man continued. He said, well, I know that TB is a very infectious disease. Now there's no way that I can conceal my true state of health. Either if the Sayadaw would be kind and compassionate enough to grant me permission to continue with the practice in this yekta, or otherwise I shall have to leave. And if I leave, there's only one path for me, and that is the path of death. Very touching words. Touched the heart of the Sayadaw. And Sayadaw, of course, was very quick. He started to talk to him and encourage him, to inspire him to continue the practice. And after making special arrangements to sort of quarantine him so that the disease can be kept under control and not cause a local epidemic in the yekta, he gave him instructions to continue his meditation. Within a month, this yogi had made such fantastic progress in his practice that he had overcome his TB.
Yoga level ပြောက်ပြီးတော့ဣဒ္ဓကပြန်ပြီးတော့သွားနောက်3နှစ်လောက်အနေမှာဘုန်းကြီးလှုပ်ပြီးတော့ဣဒ္ဓပြန်ရောက်လာပြန်တယ်အဲ့ဒီခါကျတော့ကြည့်ရတာဝါဖြိုးဖြိုးပါပဲဆွန်လည်းပဲကိုယ်တိုင်ခံစားနိုင်တယ်ဆိုတဲ့အကြောင်းချောင်းလည်းပဲပြန်ပြီးတော့မဆိုးနဲ့ဆိုးတော်ဘူးဆိုတဲ့အကြောင်းစားနိုင်တောက်နိုင်တယ်ဆိုတဲ့အကြောင်းပြောတယ်နောက်ဆုံးဘယ်လိုတော့ဦးစင်းကြီးတို့ချောင်းစိုးတစ်ခါလာသေးသလားလို့တရားမမှတ်ရင်တော့လေချောင်းလေးကတော့နည်းနည်းရက်ကြည့်တော့ဖြစ်တယ်ဖျားတဲ့မှတ်လိုက်ရင်တော့အဲ့ဒီရက်ကြည့်မရှိတော့ဘူးတဲ့တော်ထူးဆန်းတာပဲလို့ကောင်းပါတယ်လို့အခုတော့တရားလက်မလို့ဘူးတဲ့တရားအသိကောင်းတဲ့တရားပဲတဲ့ဆေးတဲ့ဖြစ်သွားတာပဲဆရာဝန်ဒီကုလို့မပြောက်နိုင်တဲ့ယောဂတရားဆေးနေပဲပြောက်သွားတာတဲ့တပည့်တော်လူဖြစ်ရကျိုးနှပ်ပါပြီတဲ့ရှင်ကြီးကပြောပါလား
After he had finished his retreat, being completely cured of tuberculosis, he left the yekta. And about 3 years later, he reappeared in the yekta, this time as a monk. He came and he was quite different. He looked well-fed and robust and healthy. He came to the Sayadaw and they struck up a conversation. Sayadaw asked him about how he felt now. Did the TB ever occur again? Was he suffering from... Did he get into coughing spates again? And he said, it's really fantastic. Since I've overcome the TB, ever since I've left the yekta, I've been very healthy. The TB has not recurred even once. And as for the coughing, at times, I feel kind of itchy in the throat. But if I note it, if I'm mindful, I'm able to be aware of the itch in the throat, immediately the coughing will not occur. And he started to praise the Dhamma. He says, it's really fantastic, it's miraculous. I've been trying all these years, I was trying all those years to get, to look for a course of treatment so that I can cure my TB, but to no success. And I came to the Yekta and did this meditation and sort of drank the medicine of the Dhamma, and I'm completely cured.
But Utone Yoga Chin, Xiao Nidia, Celebrate Pioba Ome.
Utong.
Utong Dora Yoga Chindia. Uchung Dora.
Impacted intestine. Kuna ga byo hala. Ne. Chunsa ro ga. Edi yoga.
Jog dara, Xiao Ni be.
Xiao Ji. There is another very interesting case of a doctor who had a rare sort of ailment, and it's called the impacted intestine.
Yeah, it's one part of the intestine is pushing you there.
It's a sort of a disease, it's sort of a condition where a segment of the intestine is pushed into itself, and there's an obstruction in the intestine.
Alicia, when you are Ponyo Yeda Yogi go Kame Siku Pini Vale. So the way out of this Yaonia, they are to Atobu Wadanama Pava. Now Pain Jama, Shadowyayu, Gino Widow to Ema Ato Yene. The other body, Titan, the Mia, Tweet over it. That the idea to a sheet over it.
Now, this doctor was actually a sort of a resident doctor at the Yekta. He gave free medical service to yogis who were having problems with their health in the course of practice. In fact, he was not a yogi at first. He was just someone who wanted to volunteer his medical service. But later on, he had a lot of faith and respect for the late Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw. And gradually, he started to experiment with the meditation at home and found that it was very satisfying. He began to get a taste of the Dhamma, so to speak. And he was also slowly developing kind of durable sort of faith.
The Shema Alicia, when you by now, so we are saying that who you send a Jide Kama. Transiness Yauniga Uton Biro, Cow and Dore, Udi Chatore, Questing Mapshima, Questing Luciano, Majagi Tinhines, or Questable to Pinsignavare.
One day he had a stomach pain, stomach ache, and he went to see one of his colleagues and he got a checkup. I think they took an X-ray of his stomach and found that, and diagnosed that he had this impacted intestine. A segment of the intestine had gone into another segment and was blocked. His colleague said that a surgical operation was essential. If not done in time it would be very fatal. One could meet one's death. So they prepared the operation theatre, and he was about to be operated on.
အဲ့ဒါလိုတည်းကြတော့ဘုန်းကြီးနဲ့အခြားနာယကတစ်ပါးဆေးရုံကိုအမြန်ကြွပြီးတော့လူနာနှစ်သိမ့်ပါတယ်လူနာကတော့သိစကားမပြောနိုင်ပါဘူးဟုတ်တယ်မဟုတ်ဘူးဒါလောက်ပါပဲအဲ့တော့ဘုန်းကြီးတို့လည်းပဲဘုရားဝတ္တိတနာအတိုင်းနှစ်သိမ့်အားပေးတာပါလေအားပေးပြီးတော့နောက်ဆုံးဘုန်းကြီးကဒကာကြီးလည်းပဲတရားထုတ်ထားတာပဲကိုယ်သာပါစီစိတ်မနှွမ်းစီနဲ့လို့ခန္ဓာကိုယ်ရှိရင်ခန္ဓာကိုယ်နဲ့စတဲ့ဆင်းရဲတော့ကျုံရမှာပဲတတိလက်လွတ်လို့ရှိရင်ကိုယ်နာရောစိတ်နာရောနှမျိုးလုံးခံရတယ်လို့တတိရှိနေလို့ရှိရင်ကိုယ်သာနာပြီးတော့စိတ်မနာဘူးလို့ဒီတော့အခုခါမှာဆိုရင်ရှုမှတ်ဖို့ပဲကိုယ်အလိုပဲရှိတော့တယ်လို့ရှုမှတ်မှုပဲအားကိုးပါလို့ကိုယ်သာပါမှစီစိတ်မနှောပါစေနဲ့လို့ဒီလိုအားပေးပြီးတော့ဆင်းလာဘလူနဲ့မှသူစကားမပြောဘဲနဲ့တရားပဲတခါတည်းဂရင်ပေါ်မှာပဲသူအားထုတ်တာပဲ
When the news was brought to the yekta, Sayadaw and another elder immediately rushed to the hospital to try to encourage and inspire the patient. When he reached his bedside, Sayadaw started to talk to him. But being a patient, he was of course unable to speak very much. So Sayadaw gave him a discourse and inspired him with the Buddha's teaching. And finally, before the Sayadaw left, he told the doctor, "You have been meditating for some time. You have been meditating in your home, at home. You're an experienced yogi. Don't allow your mindfulness to slacken. As long as we have this physical frame, this body, we will always have to experience painful sensations of some sort or other. When there's pain in the body, if we are not mindful, then we will also feel suffering in the mind. There will be aversion and anger. Don't let that multiple suffering occur. It's bad enough to have this body and to suffer its physical pain. Don't let it double. Don't let the physical pain be a cause for mental suffering. Be mindful. If one is mindful of the pain, there will only be the physical pain, but the mind will be quite unaffected." And with those words, the Sayadaw left him and returned to the yekta.
အဲ့ဒါလိုပြန်လာပြီးနောက်နေ့တရင်ကြတာပါပဲဒီကခွဲစိတ်ဟိုရပြင်ဆင်ထားတဲ့ဆရာဝန်တွေဟာခွဲစိတ်ချိန်ရောက်တဲ့အခါကျတော့လာရောက်ပြီးတော့လူနာခေါ်တဲ့အခါဒီမှာနေကောင်းနေတာတွေ့ရတယ်ဒီကြစမ်းသပ်ကြည့်တဲ့အခါကျတော့ကောနာခောက်နေတဲ့ဥရိယာသူငကူအနီးတိုင်းပြန်ပြီးတော့အောဝယ်စွာပေါ့လေရောက်သွားတယ်ဒီလိုဆေးရုံကချက်ချင်းဆင်းပြီးတော့အိမ်ပြန်ရောက်ကျန်းကျန်းမာမာနဲ့ပဲသူဆေးတွေလိုက်ပြီးတော့ကုနေတာပဲ
The next day, fresh news came, and it seems that when the appointment for the operation, the appointment time for the operation was near, one of the surgeons came to collect his patient and found to his surprise that the patient was up and very healthy. Of course, they immediately checked him and found to their surprise and amazement that this impacted intestine was no longer impacted. It had straightened out and it was in its normal position. The surgical operation was no longer necessary.
နောက်တစ်ခုကတော့နှလုံးယောဂရှိအမျိုးသမီးတစ်ယောက်ပါပဲဘုန်းကြီးများနဲ့အလွန်ရင်းနှီးပါတယ်ဆရာနှလုံးယောဂ heart disease တစ်ချိန်မှာဘုန်းကြီးစီရောက်လာပါတယ်ဆရာဝန်စီတွားပြတဲ့ခါကျတော့ဆရာဝန်ကဘယ်နေ့ခွဲမှာဆိုတော့ရက်ချင်းပြလိုက်ပါတယ်တဲ့အဲ့တော့မခွဲခင်လေးဆရာတော်များကိုလာရောက်ပြီးတော့ကြော့ပါတယ်တဲ့အဲ့ဒါနဲ့ပေးလိုက်တဲ့ရက်ချင်းကသူက10ရက်လောက်နေမှဒီဆေးရုံတက်ပြီးတော့ကုသခါမှာကို
There's another case of a lady whom the Sayadaw is quite familiar with. Seems that this lady was suffering from some heart disease, some heart ailment. She had seen a doctor and he had said that she was in a critical condition and it was very essential for her to undergo a surgical operation. In fact, he had already given her the appointment date. So she came one day to see the Sayadaw shortly after she had got her appointment from the doctor. Came to see the Sayadaw and explained that she had come to pay her respects to the Sayadaw because she had to go for an operation in 10 days' time. It's supposed to be a very serious condition and that this operation was essential.
သူလည်းပဲအခွဲစိတ်ခါရမယ်ဆိုတော့တော်တော်လေးကိုစိုးရိမ်ကြောက်ကြမှုတွေဖြစ်နေပါတယ်ပြီးတော့ဘုန်းကြီးကနှစ်သိမ့်ပါတယ်ဒီကွာလည်းပဲတရားထိုက်တဲ့လောက်တော့အထုတ်ဖူးပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့လို့သိအားရဝယ်တော့မရှိသေးပါဘူးတပည့်တော့ခွဲစိတ်ကုသခံတော့ဘယ်လိုနှလုံးသွင်းရမလို့ဖျားတဲ့ပြီးတော့ဘုန်းကြီးက10လောက်ပဲစောင့်နေရတယ်ဆိုတော့ကဲရိတ်တာလာခဲ့လို့ဒီနေ့ပဲလာခဲ့လို့ချက်ချင်းပဲသူလာခဲ့ပါတယ်ရောက်လာပြီးတော့တည်ခြင်းတရားမရဏစတိပေါ့လေတည်ခြင်းတရားကိုကြက်ကြက်ဆင်ရင်ခိုင်းပြီးတော့ကြိုးစားပြီးတော့အထုတ်စမ်းပါလို့တနည်းနည်းတော့တရားမှာပဲဒီယောဂနဲ့လည်းသိနိုင်တာပဲတစ်ချိန်ချင်းတရားမှာပဲပေါ့လေပြီးတော့သိတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်စီရင်သွင်းပြီးတော့စွန့်စားအထုတ်ပြီးတော့ဆိုပြီးတော့မရဏတတိကမ္မထာလည်းပဲဆင်ញင်ပုံလေးတွေနောက်ယောဂဝေဒနာပြင်းထန်လာလို့ရှိရင်ဝိရိယနှုံးတင်ပြီးတော့အထုတ်ပုံလေးတွေပြောပြပါတယ်ပြောပြတဲ့အတိုင်းပဲသူအထုတ်လို့9ရက်မြောက်မှာသူနှလုံးဟာအလွန်တင်းမာပြီးတော့အသက်ရှူကျက်သီလမတ္တဖြစ်တာဒါပေမဲ့လို့တရားမဲ့တူတူတော့မထူးဘူးဆိုပြီးတော့ဖိမှတ်တော့အမှတ်ကနိုင်သွားတာအမှတ်ကနိုင်သွားတော့နှလုံးဟာဖောက်လဲဆိုကြတယ်ပေါက်ထွက်သွားတာဘုံပေါက်တယ်အဲ့ဒီတော့မှအသက်ရှူဒီပါဒီချောင်းပြီးတော့နေလို့ထိုင်လို့ကောင်းသွားတယ်နောက်ဆရာဝန်ချိန်ထားတဲ့အတိုင်း10ရက်နေသွားပြီးတော့ပြတော့ထုံးစံတဲ့ဆရာဝန်နေစမ်းကြည့်တဲ့အခါခွဲစိတ်ဖို့မလိုသေးပါဘူးတဲ့ဒီလိုပြောလိုက်ပါတယ်အခုဒီအဲ့ဒီဒကမာကြီးဟာအသက်ရှင်လျက်ပါပဲဘုန်းကြီးဒီအမေရိကလာကနီးလာရောက်ပြီးတော့မှကျန်ကျန်မှနဲ့ကြောပါသေးတယ်
Of course, the lady was quite petrified of having to undergo that operation. Although she had meditated before in the past, her practice was not really very deep. And so she was pretty anxious and understandably scared and frightened. She asked the Sayadaw for some advice. What should I do? How should I, what sort of attitude should I cultivate in order to go through this operation? Seeing that she had 10 more days to wait before going for the operation, Sayadaw asked her to come to the yekta immediately to do intensive practice. She returned home and brought her necessary things and came to the yekta. Sayadaw started to give her instructions on Maranasati, on the reflection, meditation on death. To ask her, instructed her to meditate on the imminence of death. And Sayadaw encouraged her and said that, well, death is something that everyone has to face. It's a matter of now, it's a matter of sooner or later. You can't escape from it. So you might as well, face it and look at it real closely and try to develop, a sort of very heroic and courageous effort in you. This is something you have to face, you have to go through. Sayadaw also talked to her about how she may have to encounter very, very unbearable pain in the course of her practice, and prepared her for the worst by giving her instructions on how to handle pain and how to cultivate the proper heroic attitude of mind. She did pretty well. She was very ardent and sincere in the practice, a real heroine, a real warrior. She started the practice, and after about 5 days, she had a fantastic encounter with the heart. The heart suddenly became very, very constricted and very tight. Breathing was very difficult and she was gasping for air. She thought at times she thought that she was, at the point of death. It was a very fine line between being alive, being mindful of what's happening in the heart, and the heart really stopping. And she watched, and the pain became really excruciating, very, very painful and unbearable. But she persisted. Heroine as she is, she just continued to look, very persistent, very patient, very enduring. She looked and watched, and it got worse and more constricted and more painful. And then all of a sudden there was a big explosion, like a bomb. And after that everything was clear. It was like the calm after a big storm. And breathing was easy and comfortable, and everything was spacious and light, and she felt really good. Come 10 days later, she duly went to the hospital to meet her appointment with the doctor. As is usual, the doctors gave her a preliminary checkup before the operation and found, to their amazement, that she was okay. They said, well, it's not quite necessary yet for the operation. And so they let her go. And she is still alive up to this very day. And in fact, just before the Sayadaw left Burma to come to America, she visited the Sayadaw to say goodbye.
ပြီးတော့နောက်တစ်ခုကနှစ်ပေါင်း20ကျော်လောက်သွေးတို့ယောဂရှင်တက္ကမကြီးတယောက်သွေးတို့ယောဂအရှင်းပြောက်သွားပုံလေးတွေပြောပြရစီဦး High blood pressure.
About 20 years ago, about 20 years ago, there was another woman, lady who was suffering from high blood pressure. And this is also another case of success.
အဲ့ဒီယောဂရှိလို့ဆရာဝန်စီလည်းပဲမကြာခဏသွားနေရတာပိုက်ဆံတွေလည်းကုန်လှပြီပြီးတော့ဘုန်းကြီးကစောစောလေးကတိုက်တွန်းနေပါတယ်ဓမ္မကြီးတရားအားထုတ်လို့ရှိရင်ယောဂနဲ့တည်သွားတော့မှဓမ္မကြီးအတွက် နောက်ဘဝအတွက်ပေါ့လေကျေးဇူးရှိလိမ့်မယ်ဆိုတာတိုက်တွန်းပါတယ်ဒါမှမဟုတ်အကြောင်းအမျိုးမျိုးပြပြီးတော့သူကဆရာဝန်အားကိုးနဲ့ဆရာဝန်ကြီးစီသွားနေတာပဲ
She had been suffering from high blood pressure for a long time, and she, of course, had to go very regularly to see the doctors for treatment, for drugs and medicine, and various therapies. And she also came to see the Sayadaw sometimes, and the Sayadaw would always encourage her to meditate, saying that, why don't you come and meditate? It's good for you. And even if you die in the course of meditation, it will be very good. It's you build up a lot of merits, and even death will be a good one. You can enjoy a lot of happiness in the hereafter. But she came up, of course, with bags of excuses, and she continued to take refuge in her doctors.
အဲ့ဒီတက္ကမကြီးကတော့အခြားမဟုတ်ပါဘူးရိတ်သားထဲမှာနေတဲ့အမှုတန်းမိသားစုပါပဲဒီတော့သူ့ကိုခဏနာလေးပြောရတယ်တက္ကမကြီးတို့ရိတ်သားထဲနေပြီးတော့အခြားအဝေးကလာပြီးတော့အားထုတ်ကြတာတရားတွေတွေ့ကြတယ်လို့နိုင်ငံခြားတော်လာအားထုတ်တယ်ရိတ်သားထဲနေပြီးတော့တရားတော်အားထုတ်ဖို့မရဘူးလို့တက္ကမကြီးတို့ကဘာနဲ့တူလဲဆိုတော့စီဒီအနိဗ္ဗာန်ဖရာအနိဗ္ဗာန်မှာရှိတဲ့ဖရာချီမှာရှိတဲ့ချင်းသေးကြီးတွေလို့ရှိနေတယ်လို့ပါလဲပြတဲ့ချင်းသေးကြီးတွေဆိုချင်းသေးကြီးတွေကဖရာပဲဥလှည့်မထားဘူးလို့ဖရာကြောပေးထားတယ်လို့ခဏနာလေးပြောလိုက်တဲ့ခါကျမှတပည့်တော်ဝင်အားထုတ်ပါတော့မယ်ဖရာတဲ့ဂရီပေးပြီးတော့သူဝင်အားထုတ်ပါတယ်
In fact, this woman was in a very special circumstances. She in fact belonged to one of the staff members in the Yekta, one of the family members of the staff, and she stayed in the Yekta compound. So the Sayadaw one day talked to her and instigated her. He says, look, there's so many people who come from so far to the Yekta to meditate. And there are even foreigners who come to the Yekta to meditate, and they have tasted the Dhamma. They've had very deep practice going for them. They've had fantastic experiences. And look at you, you're a member of the staff and you stay in the Yekta, and you haven't meditated to any level of satisfaction yet. Sayadaw says, you remind me of the lion, the guardian lion that is to be found at the foot of a stupa. Well, if you've seen stupas before, you know that at the entrance to stupas we find a statue of a lion, a very fierce-looking lion that's guarding the stupa. And this lion has its back to the stupa and never has a chance to pay respects to the stupa. And while she felt quite hurt by what the Sayadaw said, it certainly Sayadaw certainly drove the point home, and she said, well, I'll try.
Now တရားဝင်ပြီးတော့အားထုတ်တဲ့အခါဝေဒနာကရောက်တဲ့အခါကျတော့တရားကြောင့်ဖြစ်တဲ့ဝေဒနာနဲ့သူသွေးတို့ယောဂဝေဒနာပေါ့လေနှစ်ခုပူးပေါင်းပြီးတော့အကြီးကျယ်မခံတာအောင်ဖြစ်တော့တာပါပဲ
She started the retreat, and within a short time, when she reached the stage of pain, she had a really tough time with Dhamma pain and the pain of her illness, of the pain that is connected with high blood pressure.
အဲ့ဒီခါမျိုးမှာကောင်းမလဲမဆန်း Này nó tụi ta tụi đi cả mà ego là biết được khó đấy. Ta tụi đi cả phải cả xoay vào đi, phong nhiên là về phải cả xoay vào đi, luôn xoay được cái gì đó. Nào xong phong nhiên cái này đó vào đấy, nhưng mà giờ phong nhiên luôn lại biết được cái tiền cái gì đó, biết được sẽ ăn thôi. Mà cái này đó, cái này tụi thì sẽ cho đi vào đi, uống nước cho đi vào đi, mình biết vào mà làm được thế này đấy. Ô tiền cái gì, tiền là biết được, biết được phi ăn thôi đó. Thì cô đấy cái apu cô đấy bảo đi, chỉ chết thôi đó, chui đi cái đấy thôi là đấy. Mà đi là này nè là đó, cái đấy còn là đi tụi đi yoga bây giờ đấy, đủ thì về đi ngoài giờ đấy tới xin đi vào đấy, tụi đi yoga nấu tháp giờ bây giờ mình làm đó bảo.
The condition became so bad that she could hardly eat nor sleep. And she was suffering so much that the members of the family were pretty alarmed. They stayed in the yekta and they came to beg her to return home to their quarters so that they could take care of her. And on the other hand, Sayadaw was pushing her along and saying that you shouldn't go, you should just continue your practice and see it through. So she was sort of torn between her family on the one hand and Sayadaw's instructions on the other. And it was a battle. They came again and again, and the Sayadaw was insistent again and again. And finally, Sayadaw's insistence won, and she persisted with the meditation. She had a new surge of inspiration and had a very strong resolve to see the meditation through no matter what happens. So let me die if it may be, but I'm going to meditate through. Very tough woman. And so she did. She went through the meditation, went through this very excruciating and fantastic, unbearable pain. At times it seemed as though her whole brain was going to fall apart. The veins and the blood vessels in the brain was throbbing and pounding and hammering, but she persisted, very enduring. She looked, and what happened was that a lot of heat started to emanate from her body. It became so hot that she radiated a lot of heat. But finally, she overcame all these sensations, and everything became very still and calm. She had won the battle, and the high blood pressure was completely cured, and she never had to resort to medicines again for that disease.
နောက်တစ်ခုကတော့အမျိုးသမီးတွေမှာဖြစ်တတ်တဲ့ယောဂမျိုးနဲ့တူပါတယ်။ဘာယောဂဆိုတာတော့ဘုန်းကြီးကတော့မသိဘူး။ပိုက်ထဲမှာအလုံးကြီးရှိတယ်လို့ဆိုတာပါပဲ။ဆရာဝန်သွားပြတဲ့အခါကျတော့ဆရာဝန်ကခွဲစိတ်ကုသခံမှုအကြံပေးလိုက်ပါတယ်။
Uterine fibroid.
There is another case of a woman who was suffering from uterine fibroid, if you're aware of it. It's something to do with the uterus, I guess. I don't know. And she had a pretty swollen belly, and went to see the doctors. And the doctor said that, well, you have to go through an operation.
Now, the Kamaya Kwesika Maleve to Chowdet, they are Malay Chowden and Divare. Shawan Leve to Tajane as Shawan is a Minu Kwesito Namakamuquare. Jada Dwavida Tiane, Timere, the Vida Yeta Yola. Yeta Yoda Kajara Tunza, Dia Atulu. ဝေဒနာကရောက်တဲ့ခါကျတော့ခန္ဓာစောစောပိုင်းကပြောသလိုပဲတရားဝေဒနာနဲ့ငါသူရှိတဲ့ဝေဒနာတခါတည်းပူပေါင်းပြီးတော့သူနှိမ့်ဆက်တော့တာပဲအလွန်ဆိုးတယ်လို့ပြောတာပါပဲအဲ့ဒါဘုန်းကြီးကလည်းသူအားပေးပြီးတော့မှတ်ခိုင်းတော့ဝေဒနာမှတ်ကနိုင်သွားတယ်မှတ်ကနိုင်သွားတဲ့အပိုင်းမှာခုနအလုံးကြီးခွဲစိရမယ်ဆိုတဲ့အလုံးကြီးဟာတခါတည်းအတန်မြည်ပြီးတော့ပောက်ကွဲသွားတယ်ပြောတယ်အဲ့ဒီပောက်ကွဲပြီးတဲ့အချိန်ကစပြီးတော့ဒကမာကြီးဟာ3-4 ရက်လောက်ကတော့အဝိတ်ခဏခဏလဲနေရတယ်တဲ့အဲ့ဒီကစပြီးတော့အခုအဲ့ဒီဒကမာကြီးကကြမ်းကြမ်းမာပဲဝါဖြိုးဖြိုးပါပဲကြီးကြီးလင်းလင်းပါပဲအခုဒီအသက်ရှင်လေးပါပဲကောင်းနေပါတယ်
Well, this woman was of course very terrified that she had to go for an operation. She would not listen to it at all. I'd rather die than to go to this hospital and die there. I'd rather die going to the yekta and meditate rather than to die in that hospital. So she was very determined. She came to the yekta and meditated under the Sayadaw. Well, as the story goes, she went through all those very unbearable sensations and pain, and with the Sayadaw's guidance, she was able to gain a lot of victories in the many battles that she fought with pain. Finally, there was this great big battle where the lump in her uterus gave a lot of trouble. It tightened and became very taut and hard and very painful. She noted it, and suddenly it exploded again with a sound. And from the moment that it exploded, she had quite difficult time because she had to change her clothes every now and then for about 3 whole days. But after that, to her surprise, she found that she was very healthy and completely cured of disease.
ပြီးတော့နောက်ဆုံးတစ်ခုပဲပြောပြရစီတော့နောက်ဆုံးကတော့ဘုန်းကြီးတို့စေကုသရေးဆိုင်ရာက Sister ဆရာမကြီးတယောက်ပါပဲအဲ့ဒီဆရာမကြီးဟာတနေ့နဲ့တနေ့စားလို့မကောင်းအိတ်လို့မကောင်းဖြစ်ပြီးတော့သူ့လေချောင်းဟာနဲ့အသက်ရှိလို့လည်းနေရာမကျအဲ့စကားပြောရတာလည်းပဲတိတ်မကောင်းလှစရွေးတွေပါဒီမျိုးရတာလည်းပဲခက်ကြက်ကြက်ဖြစ်နေတာတန်တရားဖြစ်တာနဲ့ဆရာဆရာဝန်ကြီးတွေထံပြတဲ့အခါကျတော့ကင်ဆာလို့ဆရာဝန်ကြီးတွေကယူဆပါတယ်ကင်ဆာဒုတိယအဆင့်လောက်များရောက်နေလားဘာလားတော့မသိဘူးပေါ့လေသူ့ level မှာတော့အဖုတွေ့တယ်ပြောပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီကအသားလေးယူပြီးတော့သူတို့စိတ်သိပ္ပံနည်းရစမ်းသပ်ဖို့သူ့ကိုတောင်းဆိုပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့လို့ဆရာမကြီးကလက်မခံပါဘူးသူတို့ကုသမခံမဲနဲ့တရားနဲ့ပဲကုသမယ်ဆိုပြီးတော့တရားအားထုတ်ဖို့ရိတ်တာရောက်လာပါတယ်သူကတော့ငကောလည်းတရားအားထုတ်လက်စာရှိပါတယ်ဒီမှာကြီးကတော့
Sayadaw would like to give a final case example, and this is the case of a nurse who had some difficulty with her throat. It became suddenly very dry. She had difficulty in talking. It was almost always ticklish, and she wanted to cough a lot. Her voice became gaspy. She had some doubts. She had some suspicions as to what was happening there. She went to see some of her doctor colleagues in the hospital, and they diagnosed the the case and found that it was cancer. Of course, Sayadaw doesn't know what stage, whether it's the first stage or second stage of cancer that she had gotten into, but the doctor suggested that perhaps she should go for treatment. but she refused. She had meditated before to some extent in the yekta, and she was determined to go back to the yekta to try her luck in meditation.
အဲ့လိုတရားထုတ်တဲ့အခါမှာအမှတ်ကနိုင်နေလာတော့ဒီသူ့ကိုယ်တွေကချွေးတွေအပူတွေပေါ့လေအာကြီးထွက်တယ်ပြောပါတယ်ပြီးတော့အမနာကိုဆိုးရတဲ့အနတ်သက်တွေလည်းပဲထွက်လာတယ်ဆိုပါတယ်မှတ်လေးပို့ပြီးတော့အပူတွေထွက်လီချွေးတွေထွက်လီအနတ်သက်တွေကလည်းဆိုးရလေတဲ့နောက်မှတ်ပါများလို့နိုင်နေသွားတဲ့အခါအနတ်သက်တွေလည်းပဲမရှိတော့ဘူးတဲ့အပူတော့ထွက်တယ်ချွေးတော့ထွက်တယ်အနတ်သက်တွေမရှိတော့ဘူးအဲ့ဒါနဲ့မှန်ရပဲနောက်သူ့ level ကအကျိတ်ကလေးကတဖြည်းဖြည်းသေးပြီးတော့အခုမရှိသလောက်ဖြစ်သွားပါပြီကြမ်းကြမ်းမာဝါဖြူဖြစ်နေပါလား
The doctors had in fact found that there was a lump in the throat, and so when she came to the yekta and she was doing her meditation, she went through the various stages and finally got to that very painful state where she had to deal with a lot of pain, unbearable pain, especially in that part of her body. It seems that as she was being very ardently and perseveringly mindful of that particular spot, it became very hot. She also sweated a lot, and a very putrid odor arose. It was very smelly. That went on for a couple of days. That pain and the sweat and the heat and the putrid odor. After a few days, however, the odor disappeared, but there was just this heat and sweating that continued to occur. Eventually, she found that the lump in her throat was significantly reduced, and up till this day, she is very healthy, not needing to have any further treatment.
ကိုပြောခဲ့တဲ့ဝေဒနာရှင်တွေဟာဘုန်းကြီးတာဝန်ယူပြီးတော့သိရလို့ကြောက်သွားတဲ့ဝေဒနာရှင်တွေပါအခြားကမ္မဋ္ဌာန်းဆရာတွေတာဝန်ယူပြီးတော့သိရတဲ့ဝေဒနာရှင်တွေနဲ့ကြောက်တာတွေအများကြီးရှိပါသေးတယ်ဘုန်းကြီးမှလည်းတပည့်အကြောင်းတွေလည်းယောဂတွေကြောက်တာလည်းရှိပါသေးတယ်အဲဒီတလောက်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်တော့လုံလောက်ပါပြီတခုတော့ရှိပါတယ်ဘုန်းကြီးပြောချင်တာဒီတရားအထုတ်လို့ရှိရင်တော့ယောဂပျောက်ရမယ်ဆိုတဲ့အာမခံချက်တော့မရှိပါဘူးဘုန်းကြီးတို့မှာသို့တော့စွန့်စားပြီးတော့အားထုတ်လို့ရှိရင်တော့တရားကနိုင်နေသွားရင်ငကိုကစိတ်ကုလို့မပြောက်နိုင်တဲ့ယောဂတွေတော့ပျောက်တတ်တယ်ပျောက်နိုင်တယ်ဆိုတာတော့အဲ့ဒါတော့ဘုန်းကြီးတို့ပြောရမှာလား
The few case histories that you heard just now are just a handful of the many cases that the Sayadaw had come across personally in his experience as a meditation teacher. There are innumerable cases of yogis who had similar experiences of curing chronic diseases and old injuries that were reported and related by other meditation teachers in Burma. However, even though these may just be a sample, Sayadaw believes that they will be quite sufficient for all of you. Hopes that it will be inspiring. However, Sayadaw would like to remind the yogis here that he is not making any guarantee that all chronic illness, all chronic diseases or past injuries can be totally cured through the practice of meditation. All he is trying to suggest is that there is a great possibility that if a yogi is very ardent and persistent and heroic and courageous in his effort to be mindful of painful sensations arising out of chronic diseases or past injuries, then they might find a miraculous recovery. He's just trying to point to a great possibility if there is persistent effort.
Yoga တွေထဲမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကင်ဆာယောဂအဆိုးဆုံးပဲကုသလို့မရနိုင်တဲ့အပိုင်းရောက်သွားသည့်တရားအောင်မှဒီယောဂရှင်ဟာအမှန်ကိုပင်မဆင်းရတယ်လို့ဆိုပါတယ်ညှဉ်းညူရတယ်လို့ဆိုပါတယ်တရားလေးတော်အခြေခံရှိထားရင်မညှဉ်းညူရပဲနဲ့ညင်ညင်သာသာလေးနဲ့ပေါ့လေအသက်ထွက်သွားနိုင်ပါတယ်အမှန်ကောင်းပါတယ်သူကတော့ကိုယ်စိတ်ကိုလည်းထိန်းချုပ်ပြီးတော့ပေါ့လေကောင်းကောင်းလေးတည်သွားနိုင်ပါတယ်ဒီမှာဒီလောက်အထိအကျိုးဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဒီတရား
This Satipatthana meditation is especially could perhaps be especially useful for people who are suffering from cancer. Since cancer is such a terrible disease where you have to undergo so much suffering, people who die of cancer have a pretty bad bargain. They have to suffer the pain in the body and also mental pain. Sometimes people are unable to withstand that. It becomes really unbearable. But with one who is quite established in Satipatthana meditation practice, it will not be a great burden for him to be mindful of pain, no matter how painful it is, and to die a very peaceful death, being perfectly and impeccably mindful of just pain. It will be a good death.
ဘယ်လိုပြောက်သွားသလဲဘာကြောင့်ပြောက်သွားသလဲဆိုတော့အချက်ကိုတော့နောက်ပုဇင်တရားတွေဟောတဲ့အခါမှာစာရွေးနဲ့လက်တွေ့ပေါင်းစပ်ပြီးတော့ဘုန်းကြီးဖြည့်ရှင်းပြပါဦးမယ်ဒီနေ့တော့ဒါလောက်ပဲတော့ကြပါစို့
Sayadaw will talk about the cause of the reason why it is possible for diseases to be cured through the practice of Satipatthana meditation when he comes to the subject of the 7 factors of enlightenment. For tonight, this will be all.